And we've got another big one here. Tobias Dosweiler and Daniel Vasilev. 6,600 in the middle on the river.
Let me see a jam.
Yeah, in position.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously minimum here. I mean, I guess you can't say for sure these guys, but minimum you would assume is a flush in this spot. And a relatively strong flush. I didn't see exactly, obviously, how this pot got to the river, but once you go all in here, typically representing like pretty strong flush here.
What's the minimum you would call with?
So out of position, in this spot, out of position is going to, again, I didn't see how they got to the river, so flush versus flush, pretty big cooler. So it's going to depend how out of position got to the river, whether or not they need to call, like, basically there's going to be certain spots you actually call worse than a flush here, obviously, right? So,
yeah.
You're going to call, for the most part, most of your hearts to get to the river in this line, because a flush is a good hand, and your opponent isn't going to have like that many flushes. So it's bet flop call.
It was 3-bet free.
Yep.
And then check, bets, about half.
Yep.
Call. And on the turn it goes check and bet again, half again. Call. Then we would check and jam.
Yeah, so at 1-1 in this spot, you're gonna have to just call like a lot of your flushes. I mean, this is the type of spot where, looking at theory and how actual like practice plays out, there's gonna be a lot of opponents who don't know how to bluff this river as the in-position player. Obviously, these stakes are gonna be much different, but knowing how to start a bluff on this flop and arrive at this river, and then not just have ace of hearts, king of hearts type holdings, for that, and also to value jam thin enough. It's kind of like these spots are very obviously interesting. And then it's out of position, it's kind of just in a, obviously, like, in position is not going to shove worse than the 10 of hearts. So basically what you would do here is whatever you think your opponent's shoving for value, say the minimum hand he would shove, basically just call obviously that hand and better always. So if you assume your in position is going to shove, say the jack of hearts or better, then if you have, obviously the queen of hearts are better, you always call. The jack of hearts, probably mainly going to be call. And then anything other than that is basically a bluff catcher. Yeah. And there'll actually be certain hands that make better bluff catchers than a flush, just depending on your hole cards and stuff, right? So it could be like certain pocket pairs make bad bluff catchers because your opponent is supposed to be bluffing with, say, the offsuit card that you have. So like tens with a heart could actually be a not a great bluff catcher if your opponent's supposed to do a ton of bluffing here with hands like queen 10, jack 10 type holdings, right? So maybe you actually want to bluff catch the river when you have a card that just blocks his, maybe just like pocket queens no heart, because then you block like ace queen offsuit with a heart, or pocket jacks no heart, like those type of hands, right? So those spots become very very like nuanced, and show you how tough these spots are, especially when you're playing for this much money.
You have to factor in some potential pure bluffs as well, and I guess is it profile specific, or you expect like really any of these players to be able to mix those in as well? Because we've seen, I think once or twice I saw like on a 4 to a flush board, somebody on the river without having a flush actually went for the bluff, and I think they got called.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of these spots, when you look at, they don't feel great to bluff, especially when you bluff and get called. But if you look at how, even this spot again, like he jammed, and this guy had to had to tank call, a pretty strong hand, a 10 high flush, right? So if a 10 high flush is uncomfortable on the river, then you're not going to have the ace of hearts that often, or even the king of hearts that often. So great spot to bluff then, right? Yeah. I see also one of my former students, Matthias, is in the chat too. What's up, man? Good to see you.
Hello, Matthias.
Yeah, he was with us for a few years. He's now off on his own, grinding it up. But yeah, good to see you, man.
All right, let's see if we can get some more big hands here observed. And
yeah, there's definitely not much of a, like, if you're watching this stream consistently, you're gonna see like pretty big pots on the regular. Like that's another big difference you'll notice when you're watching high stakes players is the frequency at which bets go in. Both like C bets, raises, just like the bets per street. There's a lot of stakes where you're not going to see like bet check raise 3-bet, like that type of stuff as much. But yeah, they're definitely some fun pots to see when they're just betting and raising all the time.
Yeah, they generally play pretty fast, especially on river. Like sometimes, like, I mean, maybe it's like it's just obvious for them. And also, like, if you're the caller, you have like 20 seconds to think about it. If you're going to call a jam, you've already made your decision. But I'm almost surprised at how fast they've played sometimes, especially Linus. Like, it just seems like when he was in the zone, he was just so fast, like calling just shoves, stacks were flying left and right.
Yeah, I mean, some of it obviously comes like that guy is. It's insane how many hours he can play. I think he was like, someone said he was like 8 tabling the other day, just like playing for like 10 hours or whatever. I don't know, just crazy to be able to play this. When your competition is this tough for that many hours, and still be playing like very well on hour 9. It's just crazy.
He's been playing some long hours. Like, I saw him often play in the afternoon and late at night. He doesn't go to sleep that late from what I saw, like usually, 2, 3 a.m. And I was theorizing that maybe some players were going to try and start playing a little bit later if they don't really want to play with him as much, because it has to be difficult on the win rate, right, to play with Linus. Like, I don't think too many people will be confident that they can do consistently well against him.
Yeah, for sure. That was a pretty small pot, but what was it? Can you replay the one on the top left?
Top left?
Yeah, it was just like sometimes these smaller pots are pretty interesting. I just was just curious what the river action was. I think it might have just went check on the river, in which case it's not that interesting.
So small bet on the flop.
Check call, check, and then just showdown. Okay, yeah. I thought, because the only thing that would be interesting, I didn't see the river action, so I didn't know if he had decided to go for like a bigger bet with this hand. Typically, you're not gonna use a ton of big bets here on the Ace-Iris river as out of position, but thought it would have been interesting if he made the hero call with 4s of the heart.
And we had one here too. I think that's the one. Let's see. It was a squeeze, I assume. Yeah. Pretty big. Oh no, it was called 4 bets. Okay. 250, 850, and 2450. And I love that, by the way, some of these tables are show tables. I think that's so cool that you get to see if there is no showdown what actually fully happened.
That's some of the best stuff where you just like, you get to the river and you're just like, you can kind of guess, I expect him to show up with this type of hand, and then they show you something different.
He opened bigger than people usually would here. JSM looks like 3.5.
Yeah, I think, again, I haven't played with JSM before, but from what I've heard, I believe he uses like a lot of different preflop sizes than you might expect, or than you're used to. I mean, that's a way to give yourself edge, right? Is to just play sizes or ranges that your opponents are less familiar with. So maybe limping, blind versus blind, opening bigger, blind versus blind, those type of things.
And surely, if you're in this type of world championship, you have to put in some work to study this guy, right? Because he might be at your tables often. You can't afford to like be out of your comfort zone, I would assume.
No, exactly. Yeah, especially when you're playing a lot of tables. And again, there's no one at any of these tables who's just giving away money. Everyone's battling and knowing what they're doing. Mario was asking like what makes Linus so special. I think like, well, we just kind of touched on like being able to play his A game, or maybe it's not always his A game, but we'll consider A game for anyone else, or at least maybe his B game is just so good it's better than most people's A game. But like for so long, right? It's very tough to play, even 2 to 4 tables for 2 to 3 hours of this level of competition and not get mental fatigue. Whereas obviously that guy can just play for 8 hours, and like I kind of said earlier, it seems like on hour 7 he's almost as good as he was on hour 2, which is very difficult. And then as you had mentioned, that he's also just seems to just like bluff catch very well in the very difficult spots, where your opponent just, when you get to the river, and we've all been in that spot where you're just thinking like, please check, and obviously he's not the type that is going to check in those spots if he doesn't have to, and then he puts you in that tough spot, and then when the roles are reversed, he's able to navigate and bluff catch well in those spots.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's not just like one of the best players in the world. He also has like supposedly, right, a very big bankroll behind him. So on paper, he should be one of the harder people to bluff. Somebody once told me the same thing about Stephen Chidwick. In a PLO tournament, somebody I know was like, I tried to bluff Stephen Chidwick once. I'm not going to do it again. He just has so much money. He doesn't care. If he thinks he's right on the river, he's just going to call you anyway. So
yeah. When you can make the right decision and not have money factor into it, it definitely helps. It's kind of like if you train in like GTO Wizard, you know, a lot of times those spots are easy to make because they're not real chips.
yeah.
So if you're wrong, yeah, you just, oh, I was wrong, I'll fix it next time. But you know, when someone shoves for 10K on the river, you know, it's a lot more. There's a lot more pressure on making the right decision.
I mean, technically, you're not completely wrong very often because there is always that 1 or 2% that makes you right? We'll take
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
The small wins.
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then, right?
Exactly. Okay, here we got a spot with Chris Nguyen and Jason Gale betting small again here in the small blind. This looks like this was 3-bet pre-flop.
Yeah.
No rake. Is there like or somewhat different ranges that you feel players are gonna have to study hard for this since there is no rake? Like you have more defense in the big blind, in the small blind. Sorry, I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of in between like a regular cash game and a tournament because there's no ante.
Yeah.
So there's no rake, so you play wider, but there's no ante, so you don't play quite as wide. So the ranges will look somewhere between a typical, you know, cash game strategy and then a tournament strategy, basically. So, but yeah, Jason Gale, like I believe he's been playing for a long time, as far as I'm aware, and he does likes to do these kind of things that again people aren't necessarily used to. So it's not very common you're going to see that small of a bet on this texture in a 3-bet pot, right? So and when someone bets that small, it's going to force imposition to defend super wide, and then obviously have some raises because there's going to be a portion of your range that wants to build the pot more quickly, and then if your opponent is c-betting the small size, just naturally part of the strategy that combats that is to raise a bit more.
And he went for a check call on the turn here. Checks the river to Chris Nguyen.
Small bet, raise, check call. Like the biggest brick in the deck you could, like the board ran out brick. Yeah, the only hand, obviously the only like, it's not, I guess, a super brick in the respect that a hand like Queen 9 now loses some overpairs, but like pretty insignificant portion. So yeah, we saw a raise with which kind of like a mergey raise. So he raised with bottom pair and then barreled the turn, and actually worked out well. He got called twice by a draw. But yeah, basically the purpose of this raise is the times Jassam just has like, you know, say ace king, ace jack, ace 10, ace 5, or maybe even a hand like pocket 8s, pocket 7s. These hands put in a really awkward spot. And then when he barrels the turn for the size he chose, same thing kind of applies. He'll get, this is a kind of a great example of what happened. So he'll get Jassam to fold a hand like pocket 7s, pocket 8s, maybe even pocket 10s, because, you know, imposition's bluffing region will contain a 10 a lot. So he'll get Jassam to fold a bunch of the hands that he loses to, while actually getting him to call some hands he beats, like this hand, like we saw. So a hand like Jack 10, maybe he calls the turn with just like Ace King High, Ace Queen of Hearts, or sorry, Ace Jack of Hearts, like those type of hands. So it's kind of it's called like a value bluff. So you basically turn a pair into a bluff against a portion of your opponent's range while still getting called by the portion of range you still beat. So yeah, these are very fun spots to see when they work out just like that, right? He got his opponent to call twice with Jack High, and then he shows down and wins the pot.
I see someone in the chat is asking who's in the commentary booth. So I'm your host, Yoan Merlo, aka Todd, and this is Ryan Riske with me from Poker with Riske, great content creator and coach. I have a question about the Jack 10 here. Would you have disliked a check jam on the turn from Jason Gale?
Typically, so in these spots when you jam, you want to be able to beat more of your opponent's, like, or have more equity, I guess, versus your opponent's bet calling range. And a hand like Jack 10, and you also want to make sure it's not to say, so if he had Jack 10, he can definitely do some check jamming in this spot if he thinks his opponent's gonna, like, you know, just in theory, and if he thinks his opponent's gonna bet fold. But you also want to make sure that if you think of this spot, if he does like check call, and then the river is a card like an 8 or a king, and he's not playing this range appropriately, imposition is going to just like have, especially on an 8, where out of position is not really going to improve much on the 8 if they're jamming or fast playing or playing aggressively, we'll say, with all their Jack 10. So it's a combination of giving yourself some strong hands on the river, and then when you face a bet here, you have good equity to call, especially again if you have like relatively good implied odds when you hit on a king or an 8. Whereas when you jam, you're gonna get it in pretty bad when you do get called, and so unless your opponent's massively over bluffing, you can't go too crazy here with a hand that has like this level of equity against your opponent's range.
Thank you so much. Makes a lot of sense.